Hello, hope you're having a good day so far. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving as we just were able to celebrate that a few days ago. Whether you were with family or had to be separated from family, hopefully you had some time to be able to think about some things that you were thankful for. As we begin today's thought or lesson, I want us to think about, are you a part of the in crowd? You probably thought about that more when you were in school. Maybe for those of you that aren't in school, you probably haven't really thought about that or worried about that too much. But in school, that was generally something that was important as we were trying to find our place in life, as we were developing both socially and physically, all those kinds of areas. And we were just thinking about or concerned about being a part of the in crowd. Today, as we begin our little series on some different lessons in regards to leading up to Christmas, I want us to keep that in mind as we go through this lesson today. And I want us to start off by reading from Luke chapter 2. And this is a very familiar text in regards to thinking about the time of Christmas, and so keep that in mind. And we're going to kind of follow this chapter as we go through these next few weeks. But starting in Luke chapter 2, and we're going to read verse 1, and we'll be going through verse 7. And it says this, it says, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world." And then down in verse 3, it says, "And everyone went to their own town to register. So Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to Bethlehem, the town of David, because he belonged to the house and the line of David. He went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him, and was expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for the baby to be born, and she gave birth to her firstborn, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them." Now, you might have heard something at the very end of that you weren't used to hearing. In the 2010 version of the NIV, they changed the word there about the guest room from the word inn, the I-N-N. And we think about oftentimes an inn being a hotel-like place. And if you have been around for the last, say, 50, 60 years, most of you think about the idea of an inn being something like the Holiday Inn or any of the other modern-day hotels or motels that are out there. I remember growing up and going to Hutchinson, Kansas a few times, and I always thought that the Holiday Inn that was there was like the best place ever. It had the Holidome, and I remember going there. Sometimes I went there with my dad, just my dad and I, because he had a principals convention, and so I could just spend the whole day just swimming and playing miniature golf and going to the sauna and going to the workout room and playing on the ping pong tables and doing all kinds of things that place offered. It was a lot of fun. But as inns have changed, then of course now they're even more fancy than what the Holidome was at that particular time. As we know, the one in Garden City has a water park built into it, and some others have had that also. Some are very themed oriented. If you've ever gone to a place like Disneyland or Disney World, you know they have a lot of theme oriented hotels. Just a few years ago, we went to one that was a sports theme. And so one place had a big baseball field around it that you just kind of walk around. I think the pool was built around that kind of a shape. And then another one that was football related had a big football field right in the middle between two of the large buildings that had the rooms in it. And then they had two huge football helmets there in the middle, and on each end by the stairs there were two big footballs on each end. And so it was very cool to kind of look at. But back in the time of Jesus' day, inns weren't exactly like that. And that's part of the reason why it was changed to guest room, as it says here in the 2010 version. The 1972 version of the NIV and the King James version, and some of those older versions do say there was no room at the inn. But these later versions talk about the idea of a guest room or an upper room, even in some different translations. But the concept of it was more like what Jesus uses even as he is about ready to have his communion with his apostles at the very end of his life. The idea that they go to an upper room, that was pretty much a lot like it was. And so as they were going on this trip to have to go and register, they had to go and basically have this time of being able to put down their names and register who they were, and they had to go back to their town, like their original hometown where they were originally from, and to go through this time of registration. And because Mary and Joseph were about to be married, then they went together. And so Mary was a part of Joseph. As we know, married couples generally are thought of as a one unit. As you think about the Martins or the Bennetts or the Robinsons or the Fabriches or the Flax family or whatever it may be, the idea that it's all about one person, one unit as a married couple or as a family. And so they went together and they were registering there as one unit, there as a couple. And so as we see them coming, and we know that within the text that Mary is pregnant, very much along, obviously, as we see that Jesus is born during this time. But she is obviously very pregnant, and she has traveled this way, and it's been a long journey. And she gets there, and the baby is born. Now we see the baby born before we get to this concept of the fact that he was born in a manger, or he was laid in a manger, and he was born in that, probably would be kind of like a barn, but he was laid in the manger because there was no room in the inn. Now generally thought of is, as I said, it was an upper room or a guest room as it's defined here. Now, we didn't have Holiday Inns. We didn't have Motel 6. We didn't have Ramada Inn. We didn't have the Clarion Inn. Any of those kinds of types of hotels or motels or inns or anything like that. And so as people were coming into Bethlehem, it's a small place there as far as we think about the idea of a lot of people there. And so some people would offer up their guest rooms to be able to allow people to come and to stay. Now, some of us, when we have hosted different events, maybe you've had somebody stay in your house and you've allowed them to take part in the things that you have, as far as using your food, using your bathrooms, all those kinds of things that we offer up as hospitality. And so as they were going around, people were coming into Bethlehem and they were looking for a place to stay. I don't know if they were one of the last people to come into town and all the other places were already taken, or if this particular person maybe didn't have a room and they were possibly told they had a lead. Joseph and Mary had a lead that they were maybe had a place to stay in this particular family's house. But nevertheless, we see that they were not able to find a room in the inn. Now, as we think about the concept for us, I want you to think about the idea of your own self. Now, you might say that if Jesus came, or if someone came to your house, you might be very hospitable. You might be able to say, yes, they can stay here, no problem. I have a guest room, and some of us have more guest rooms available than others. But some of us maybe have smaller places. Maybe we don't have a lot of guest rooms available in our house. And so if someone were to come by, or you got a phone call or a text to say, hey, can somebody come and stay with you? You might say, well, no, there really isn't any room here. Unfortunately, I would be happy to help you out, but there isn't any room. But though I'm not talking about actual physical rooms that we maybe have room for, I want us to think about our heart or our soul or our mind in the fact of, are you a part of the in crowd? Do you have room for Jesus? When he comes around, or when he's a part of your life, do you make room for him? Or do we find ourselves either too busy or just not interested in the fact of having Jesus a part of our life? Do we put other things that are filling up our life, filling up our mind, filling up our heart to be in place of him? To be able to say, I can't find any room for him. So in that case, we aren't part of the in crowd, as I'm talking about. And so I challenge you to be a part of the in crowd and to think about the fact of putting some room in there at all times for Jesus. And I'm not saying so much the idea of, are we going to church, for instance, but what about times that are outside of that? What about times that are opportunities for us? And I always like to put an evangelistic spin on different lessons. You know, this time of year when people are talking about Jesus or maybe displaying different messages about, you know, Jesus is the reason for the season, those kinds of things that are out there. You know, regardless of what history says, and history does say that he wasn't going to be born on December 25th, but regardless of that, this is still a time in which he is remembered. When people think about him, when people talk about him, and for some who don't talk about him much at any other time of the year, this might be an opportunity to be able to share what you know about Jesus with them and maybe get someone interested. Because though there is a lot of busyness that goes on this time of year, the idea that for us, we need to make sure that we have room in the inn. We need to be a part of the in crowd, to not be a part of the not so in crowd that sometimes has no room for Jesus. But the idea that make room for him and be a part of the in crowd. So when someone comes knocking, no matter if you know who they are or if you don't know who they are, the idea that you are going to have room for them to be able to learn about your Savior, to learn about who Jesus is. The fact of, yes, he was born. Yes, he was born for the reason that he was born was to come down here on earth and to be able to understand us, understand what sin was like in the way of temptation. We know he didn't sin, but the idea of being able to understand what humanity was like, as he was part of the Godhead in human form. And he came down here to live on this earth and to be able to experience the temptations like us, yet he did not sin. And so he came here to save us from our sins. That is an awesome thing for us to be a part of. Now, I would hate to have been married to know that someday your son was going to have to die for the sins of the world. But we can be celebrating that and be thankful for that. But as we conclude this lesson, and as I think about a song, I think about I can't remember the exact name of it, but it goes along the lines of, what hast thou done for me? It kind of talks in there about the idea of making room for Jesus in our lives. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with that, but I was here I am on the spot, and I forgot exactly what that song title was. But the idea of thinking about making room for him and be a part of the in crowd. So make sure you keep that in mind as you go throughout this week, as you go throughout this time, to look for ways in which you can allow Jesus to be in your life and you would be a part of the in crowd and share him with others. Hey, thanks for listening, and God bless, and have a great week.